Do you think Pakistan will be deterred by what just happened?
No, not at all. Pakistan views Kashmir as part of this incomplete process of partition, and that
Hmm.
Pakistan itself is not complete without Kashmir. And this is a story that all Pakistanis learn. I was
Hmm.
in Kashmir 2 years ago. The counterinsurgency grid is very robust. But the fact is, you can't stop every attack. Pakistan uses its nuclear weapons to basically blackmail the West. I don't think anything has happened here strategically that is going to deter Pakistan from using terrorism as a tool of foreign policy. This burnished the credentials of the Chappan-inch Sinawala.
Hmm.
It generated a lot of jingoism in India. It had a lot of risk, as we saw, but it didn't change anything on the ground.
Hi, viewers. We're here today, a day after India and Pakistan declared their ceasefire, and we're joined by Dr. Christine Fair, who's going to explain what this means for Pakistan and its military and its terrorist apparatus. Dr. Fair is a professor at Georgetown University and is one of the world's foremost experts on the Pakistan Army as well as its support for terrorism and militancy. Welcome to Scroll, Dr. Fair.
Thank you for having me.
First question: do you think Pakistan will be deterred by what just happened?
No, not at all. The way the Pakistan Army works, it's an insurgent army. It can't defeat India conventionally, and for that matter, India can't defeat Pakistan in a short war because the
Mhm.
forces along the IB and the LOC they're similarly
Matched.
um, poised. So India's advantages only kick in during a long war, and that's increasingly difficult because of nuclear weapons and so forth. So India can't defeat Pakistan. Pakistan can't defeat India. But Pakistan views Kashmir as part of this incomplete process of partition, and that
Hmm.
Pakistan itself is not complete without Kashmir. And this is a story that all Pakistanis learn. It gives rise to every army chief. I mean, I know there was a lot of hay made about Munir's speech about Kashmir being the jugular vein of Pakistan. The fact is,
Hmm.
every army chief says this, and
Right.
every prime minister says this. This was not unique. It just, the people who said this was new just belied their ignorance because, in fact,
Mhm.
there's nothing new about it. So the Pakistan Army can't take Kashmir, but what the Pakistan Army can do is to deny India the victory of saying that Kashmir is calm, that Kashmir is a peaceful part of India. And I also want to dispel any criticism that has been leveraged against the Indian state, saying this is an intelligence lapse, this is a this that lapse, this is a that lapse. I was
Mhm.
in Kashmir 2 years ago. The counterinsurgency grid is very robust, but the fact is, you can't stop every attack. It doesn't matter how good the counterinsurgency grid is.
It's
It
not
doesn't matter.
possible.
It's just not possible. So Pakistan has to do this to show that India hasn't, in fact, compelled it or deterred it. So what this means is that we're going to see a return to normalcy, just as we did after Pulwama. But mark my words, there's going to be another terrorist attack. I don't think the
Mhm.
Pakistanis are going to go for the misadventure of an attack within India proper, because that would be catastrophic. But you never know, because the Pakistanis, when it thinks like an insurgent, it is making this implicit assumption, and quite frankly, this ceasefire kind of shows it to be the case, that the international community is going to rally to sort of pull its nimboos out of the fire. So I don't think anything has happened here strategically that is going to deter Pakistan from using terrorism as a tool of foreign policy.
But does it increase its cost? So, in Balakot in 2019, and again this time, we're seeing, for example, in this time, there are credible sources that Pakistani air bases have got hit. So, does increasing that cost at least impose a further barrier to Pakistan exporting terror to India?
I mean, the short answer is no, and the evidence really shows this, right? Pulwama was pretty costly, but let's look at the lessons that came out of Pulwama, and this really, I think, is important because it involves the duplicity of Indian and Pakistani media. So what the Pakistanis credibly can say is that they shot down a MiG, and they
Mhm.
returned its pilot, and they were accoladed for doing what a country is supposed to do, right? Look at all the accolades that were heaped upon Pakistan for, in a civilized manner, not brutalizing the pilot and returning him safe and sound. On the Indian side, what allowed India to back down was this complete fabrication of an F-16 shoot down. So let's take a look at the off ramp here. It is from the Indian public and from the Pakistani public. The Indian public believes, if I listen to Arnab Goswami, apparently Pakistan took Karachi port. So the Indians have this very fictive belief about these capacious gains that were made, vice Pakistan. Pakistan, for its part, believes that it shot down 5 Indian aircraft. Now, there is evidence that it shot down 2, but we don't know about the other 3. So the Indian and the Pakistani publics are both left with this enormous sense of victory. And by the way, because it's going to take a really long time to do satellite imagery analysis, by the time, as was the case with Balakot as well, India made very capacious claims about damage that was made to Balakot that turned out to be absolute nonsense. But it took a couple of weeks for those claims to be interrogated through satellite imagery analysis. And by the time that the actual truth comes out, it's OBE because the media has moved on to something else. And in any event, neither Pakistani or Indian media are interested in what actually happened because that's just not the way they're operating. So both of the publics have been misinformed, which allows them to have very different beliefs about the costs and the benefits that have been garnered by this misadventure.
So, a couple of things, Dr. Fair, you're saying two things which will not sound very pleasant to Indian ears. One is that it is not possible to 100% stop a terror attack, and you're saying that there's very high probability that sooner or later Pakistan will go back to exporting terror. So, what can India do now? India's really like pulled out all its stops in some way. What do you think that India could do now to credibly deter the Pakistan army from a misadventure?
So the only thing that really changes Pakistan is a decisive military defeat of the Pakistan Army that leaves the Pakistan Army in complete disarray. Now, I do want to point out that that happened in 1971. And yet, within a matter of years, we had Zia ul Haq, and we know about the terror story under Zia ul Haq's tenure. So, that's the best example we have. But there was a period of relative peace between 71 and 77 or so. There was a period of peace. So the only way to really deter Pakistan is to decisively defeat and dismember and dismantle the Pakistan army, and so thoroughly vilify it in the eyes of the Pakistanis. This is not something that India can do right now or for the policy relevant future. India is in and
Is
is in
that
a
possible at all now, given the nuclear umbrella? 97
no,
was a different
it's
era.
it's not possible at all. So
Yeah.
this is at a strategic level. It's very unfortunate for India. Um, the only way forward is the path that won't be taken, which is the international community has to resolve that the Pakistani state, as it is currently constituted, is a menace not only to India but to the international order.
Mhm. Mhm.
And what we've seen instead is that Pakistan gets away with this every single time. It was never on the blacklist FATF because that would have deprived it of IMF funds, and no one wants to deprive Pakistan of IMF funds because it's too dangerous to fail. So, absent a consolidated and concerted effort by the international community to reorder the way Pakistan does business, this is going to continue. I have a lot of empathy for the paucity of options that India possesses.
I want to unpack a little bit more of the Dr. Fair, because as this conflict was going on, Pakistan actually received a $1 billion
Yes,
loan from the IMF, right?
yes, it did. Yes, it did.
So even in a post-Afghanistan scenario, we're seeing a Pakistan which does have support from the West, and of course, it is best friends with China. So, is there? I mean, obviously, what you're saying is yes, it's a theoretical way out, but practically, will the West ever say completely turn away from Pakistan and want to dismember it or completely change the way the state is currently? Or
No.
what is going to get the West to do it actually?
Well, the answer, so as I sort of intimated, it's never going to happen. And it's
Right.
never going to happen because Pakistan uses its nuclear weapons to basically blackmail the West that we're too dangerous to fail. People feel confident that they can manage Pakistan. It's sort of like mowing the lawn. But in this belief that it has somehow managed Pakistan uh, and managed the conflict that it generates, it actually enables the very same conflict that is so dangerous.
I want to go to something that you know very well, the Pakistan Army. So just a couple of weeks back, you pointed to Asim Munir's speech, which again, like you correctly pointed out, every army chief has made. Uh, I want you to unpack what this conflict has meant for Munir. So, Pakistan, if I could say that Pakistan Army's popularity has been declining over the last few years. Does this reverse that decline?
So it's really fascinating because the Pakistan Army hates me and its enthusiasts have hated me.
Right.
Um, there have been several occasions over the past year. I was at an airport with a former Army officer, of all people. So I've had a number of people reach out to me and say, I got to tell you, I used to hate you because of your views about the Pakistan Army, but now I love you because you were right. This was an actual quote from a former Army officer at the Dubai airport.
Right.
And I was absolutely gobsmacked. And so I said, "It's because of Imran Khan, isn't it? You're an Imran Khan supporter." And he said,
Right.
"Yes." And so what Imran Khan has done has put a huge wedge between the Pakistan Army and the Pakistan people.
Mm-hmm.
And Munir has been suffering tremendously. Imran Khan really was the first prime minister, whether you love him or you hate him, to aim his sights at the Pakistan Army, which is why he's in jail, right? You don't do that and get away with it.
And we saw
Um,
remarkable scenes, right? People like overrunning Pakistani cantonments. That is, I mean, it's a
remarkable
sight that you
scenes.
don't see, right?
The Lahore Corps commander's house, just things that
Yeah.
you don't see, right? So domestically, not just Munir, but the Pakistan Army is really on its heels. The other issue that doesn't come up, of course, is that Balochistan terrorism. So I think in terms of the timing, what sort of explains what's going on with Pahalgam is kind of threefold. There had been normalcy for the most part, in the valley. Tourism was returning. Kashmiris were making money off of the increased tourism. You have the declining popularity of Munir specifically, but the army more generally, and then you have this pretty severe spike of terrorism in Balochistan. I think that sort of those three factors account for why Pahalgam and why now.
You spoke of the PTI. So the way this war has gone, and obviously when there's a war, there's a sort of there's a sense of national unity, especially behind the army. Will this really end up badly impacting the PTI?
So I don't
Into
think
the Imran
so.
Khan's party for our
Be-
viewers, by the way.
I mean, I don't think so. I think that this is going to give the army a very temporary respite from the criticism. But
Right.
let's remember, for the first time, the cor I w I would say there's always been discussion about corruption within the army, but, for the first time, you have the corps commanders being called the Corps commanders. So
Right.
there's a much more systemic rot in the Pakistan army that Pakistanis themselves are attuned to. So I think this is gonna provide some temporary respite, but it's not gonna provide uh, a permanent solution to the gap that has emerged between army supporters and PTI supporters. This is temporary. It's not permanent.
And Dr. Fed, describe for us how exactly does this terror network work? So right now, is the Lashkar-e-Taiba as strong as it was, say, 10 years back, or there has been a decline in how Pakistan looks at and supports these terror groups?
Oh, I would say just the opposite. So a lot of people know about Lashkar-e-Taiba. In fact, I just wrote a piece. Let me pull it up. People might be
Mhm.
interested in it. I can't believe I don't know it offhand, but it's very early here, and I'm not a morning person. Um, and it's free. It's called Current Trends in Islamic Ideology, and my colleague and I, Ilyas Khan translated for me this book of writings by an LET intellectual.
Right.
And in this book, he sort of lays out the relationship between LET and the Army. And so everyone knows about the relationship, LET conducting operations on behalf of the Army. But what
Mhm,
very few Indians are aware of is the domestic utility of the LET within Pakistan itself.
mhm,
So the Lashkar-e-Taiba really opposes all of the violence that's taking place within Pakistan, not just obviously the Baloch violence, but also the Islamist violence. They take aim at those that engage in takfir. They take aim at those that are trying to destabilize the government. So
mhm.
Lashkar-e-Taiba has this really important domestic function as well as an external function. And it is a militant opponent of the Islamic State, and so one of the functions of Jamaat al-Dawa's Dawa and Tabligh isn't just converting people to what they believe to be their particular interpretation of LA Hadith. It's also about encouraging this ferocious nationalism amongst Pakistanis and getting them to eschew sectarian violence, violence like the TTP, violence like the Baloch terrorists. So actually, the LET is much more important in this post 9/11 world than it was before.
In fact, one of the LET people killed by India in this strike, his funeral was attended by a couple of Pakistani army officers, even in this
Yes,
environment.
yes. No,
So
so I
that
so
that means
my most recent book that I did, which was with Safina Ustad, we translate a bunch of literature of Lashkar-e-Taiba into English, and in the biographies of the martyr biographies, it frequently details the army officers that attend the janaza.
now one of the phrases that you've used very often for the Pakistan army is you called it an insurgent organization rather than it behaving like a conventional army. Could you unpack that for our viewers?
Yeah, so it's very difficult to defeat an insurgent, right? It's very difficult.
Hmm.
Because the reason is, I mean, you take a look at the Taliban. You look at how many hundreds of thousands of forces during the height of the surge, and we still couldn't defeat the Taliban.
Hmm.
You can't defeat every single attack. But how does an insurgent organization prove that it hasn't been defeated? It just has to conduct one attack.
Right.
And so it's very easy for the Pakistan Army to show that it hasn't been defeated by conducting attacks in Kashmir. More structurally, the Indians are at a huge disadvantage, and the reason is, if the Indians want normalcy or the semblance of normalcy, which is usually measured by terrorist attacks, to return to the valley, they have to have an increasingly impressive counterinsurgency regime, which causes a lot of resentment in the valley, which furthers the goal of making Kashmiris feel that they're part of the Indian project. So the Pakistanis win this game, because it's not a game that's hard for the Pakistanis to win. But on the other hand, it's a very difficult game for the Indians to win.
What is the end game for Pakistan, for the Pakistani army here? Like it keeps on exporting terror to Kashmir. Pakistan itself becomes poorer and poorer. Where does this go and end?
So basically, the Pakistan Army only thinks of its own corporate interests. And so having an aggressive India that Pakistan Army can creditably say menaces Pakistan burnishes the Pakistan Army's credentials. It allows it to have this huge conventional footing. If there were to be peace with India, the Pakistan Army as it exists today could not exist, right? There's no rationale for its existence. So, for the Pakistan Army to have the size that it has, to have its outsized role in politics, is basically the hegemon of the state, and it has
Mhm.
a hegemonic claim to the state's resources. It needs a strong India that looks menacing, to justify the Pakistani state, the Pakistani hold on the state as it exists today. So the thing that I think it might be difficult for Indians to understand is that all of this just benefits the Pakistan Army.
It's almost conflicted in as existential to the Pakistan Army. It's why it exists, at least at this scale.
Yeah, so I would say, people say, well, if there were peace, there would be a better economy and all of this stuff. And all
Hmm.
of this is, of course, true. But the Pakistan Army puts its existential needs above material gains.
Yeah, and I think we've literally seen that happen in 71, where the Pakistan Army was ready to have Pakistan divided rather than it lose power, right?
Correct. Correct.
Uh, I want to come back to the Lashkar point. You're saying that the Pakistan Army has these close links to the Lashkar and uses them for domestic policy. I want you to unpack, Dr. Fair, how popular is support for these terror groups domestically in the public in Pakistan?
Yeah. So your average Pakistani doesn't view these groups as terrorist groups, for one thing. They view these groups as fighting a good fight in Kashmir, uh, helping to liberate their Kashmiri brethren from an oppressive Indian state. So if people are familiar with the group, they don't view them as terrorists. The other thing that Lashkar-e-Taiba does, it has a bunch of front organizations that does things like health and social service outreach. So, for example, in Sindh, where the state has completely neglected to provide water to the residents, it's also an area that has a lot of Hindu residents. The Lashkar-e-Taiba provides water services, and actually through those service provisions, they've also converted several Hindus to their creed. And so through these health and services outreach, coupled with those who know what they do in Kashmir not being viewed as terrorists, um, the support's reasonably high. Now I did a survey of Pakistan. It's now very, very out of date. I think it was done in 2013. Obviously, support for the Lashkar-e-Taiba is highest amongst the Punjabis, and it's lowest amongst the Baloch, because Lashkar-e-Taiba is also used as a bulwark against Baloch terrorism and against
Mhm.
Baloch nationalism. So the support for LET is highest amongst the Punjabis. And I don't remember what the 10 districts are off the top of my head, but in my analysis that I did of fighter biographies of Lashkar-e-Taiba, that there are 10 districts in the Punjab that account for about 90% of LET recruitment. It's very similar to the Pakistan Army, actually.
So the same districts that provide Pakistan Army recruits also provide LET recruits. Is that what you're saying?
There's overlap, yes. And the reason for that is that they need people with similar skill sets.
Hmm. I want to dig into the Punjab point because that is so important to understanding Pakistan. So I think a lot of what India did in this conflict is to target Punjab,
Yes, they
right?
did. They did.
Which is such a stark diversion from Indian policy earlier. Do you think that will have an impact on Pakistani army morale? The fact that they can't even protect what is their core ground?
So, okay, so the attacks, of course, made a lot of look. I support the attacks. I'm not criticizing India for the attacks. I want to be very, very clear, but I
Hmm.
also want to be very clear that it was very, very risky. And the fact is, none of those targets are going to strategically degrade the ability of Jaish-e-Mohammed or Lashkar-e-Taiba to operate. That's a fact. So it was a lot of risk for not a lot of gain. And so, yes, and by the way, that's why it assured that there would be a strong Pakistani response, was because, um, you know, Pakistanis, when the Indians struck, they didn't go into Pakistani airspace. Within Indian airspace, they used standoff missiles to attack Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. That was pretty provocative, right? We saw the escalation at Balakot pretty quickly. So obviously, the Pakistanis were going to respond robustly to an attack upon the Punjab. But what I wish people would reflect upon, what were the so basically what this was uh how do I put this nicely? This burnished the credentials of the Chuppan Inch Sinawala.
Hmm.
It generated a lot of jingoism in India. It had a lot of risk, as we saw, but it didn't change anything on the ground. So the purpose of this was more illustrative than it was deterrence.
Right. Or more political rather than it was
I
military or
was
strategic.
It was definitely political. I
Right.
believe the Bihar elections are the next elections that are coming up. Correct me if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
So I think they were much more political in calculation than they were aimed at degrading the organizations. Look, they're really important symbolic attacks, but they're symbolic attacks. They don't degrade the ability of these organizations to operate.
I want to zoom out to foreign policy, Dr. Fair. A couple of things. Where does the US Pakistan relationship stand now post the Afghanistan withdrawal?
So, I mean, it's a tough one because obviously during the Afghan war, we were really dependent upon Pakistan because of the ground lines of communication.
Mhm.
All of the war material, most of it flew through Pakistani airspace or was transported on the ground through Pakistani ground lines of communication. So we needed them, and we were much more willing to put up with their nonsense. But after the withdrawal, the essential concerns about Pakistan's failure, they remain in place. And you still have a constituency of people that are saying that we should be engaging the Pakistanis, we shouldn't be isolating them. And this conflict is going to burnish the credentials of those people who are arguing for engagement. Now, the Paul Kapoor has been tapped to be the Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia, and it's very unfortunate that he had not been confirmed prior to this crisis. He will not, I mean, he will be very welcomed in India. He's a lot like me. Our views are very similar.
Right,
He will not be welcomed in Pakistan.
right.
So I don't know if that's going to have. I mean, this Congress has been confirming every single appointment of Trump, howsoever unqualified. So I can't imagine that they would not approve of Paul Kapoor's appointment as Assistant Secretary of State. But it is going to limit our ability to engage Pakistan, given, I mean, Paul Kapoor, like me, has a pretty wide body of literature condemning the Pakistan Army. So we'll just have to see what happens after we have an Assistant Secretary of State in place.
Great. Final question, Dr. Fair. How do you evaluate India's foreign policy performance during this conflict?
So again, it's hard to
Right,
evaluate because the Indian media was just a sea of bakwas.
right.
But and I have to say, after the whole Balakot affair and the manufactured F-16 shoot down, I no longer take Indian announcements as being credible. India lost a lot of credibility for me in the Balakot affair. So
You think that happened because of our media? Our media was
because
so bad.
because the media was so bad, but also the Indian government directly participated in this fabrication of an F-16 shoot down. So it's not just the media, it was the Indian government and specifically the Modi government. So I can't just take Indian pronouncements at face value, but what I can see is that, um, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. You had a bunch of people engaging in both sides. We encourage both sides to engage peacefully to resolve their outstanding issues peacefully. Um, that that even Russia said this. So the
But which
fact
India sees as a defeat, right? If any both
which
sidesism is always
for
if there's
India, that's a defeat. For Pakistan, it's a victory, right?
right.
Because it's an acknowledgement that Pakistan's equities are valid. But for India, it's a defeat. So I can't say I can't evaluate the rigorous efforts that were made, but what I can see is that in the outcome of those efforts, India did not secure unequivocal support from international capitals.
In fact, uh, Trump's tweet today, the fact that he's offered to mediate, I mean, it's a shocking tweet. Like it's something that in India we're looking at with a lot of disfavor.
Correct. Now, let's be really clear, right? Trump and JD Vance are not reliable narrators. So I actually don't know the extent to which to trust their pronouncements. The Indians have pretty much rubbished a lot of what Trump has said. So I don't know the truth because my media is also unable to get to the bottom of things. So but yes, today's tweet's a really good example of what I would say a failure of Indian foreign policy. Because if India had successfully persuaded the United States of its position, we would not have seen such an obtuse statement coming from the President of the United States.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Fair. Thank you for watching, viewers. Remember, if you like the journalism that we do and want to support independent media, please go ahead and contribute to scroll.in/contribute. Thank you for watching.